Yeah, even at this early stage, middle of 2001, I was still looking for the next move. I was not confident that my contracts were going to be renewed for all of the factors which I've talked about previously. I realized I had to keep training myself up. I had to get more qualifications. And one way to consider this was doing a doctoral thesis. I'd started one in Brisbane, but I'd had to stop because my supervisor went to Kosovo. When I was at the Water Village School before Christmas, there was an interesting lady there who was studying for a doctorate. In those days, I still thought a doctorate conferred high status and would give me more opportunities to get work. I became very interested in the idea of doing one. She was very helpful at first and helped me with documents on how to prepare a proposal for a doctorate at Curtin University, which is where she was doing hers. So I went home to Christmas, Brisbane, and after I came back, I prepared my candidacy proposal, which was a substantial document of around, I think, 5,000 words. I sent her a copy by email and asked her for her comments. She did a very thorough job. I was surprised, though, by a curious comment she made about my draft, in which I referred to her article. She claimed I had not read the article, and this was not true. I had read it. In fact, I'd gone to the expense of buying the conference papers from a recent conference in Taiwan where she had presented the paper. When I casually told her of this in my reply, she redoubled her criticism. I was very worried by this turn of events, and by then I had grave doubts about working with her. I asked a friend at the university for a second opinion on my proposal, and he reassured me that there was nothing wrong with it. Although I was reassured, I was very disappointed that I could no longer work with her. The result was that I lost interest in the doctorate after putting in a considerable amount of work. Disappointingly, my friend never read the proposal either, by the way. As far as I could see, he didn't seem to, well, not in any great detail. Anyway, a couple of years later, I tried again. This was my third time to do an educational doctorate. I liaised with a university professor at UBD, and he thought that I had a good idea, which was to do a longitudinal study monitoring the introduction of the International Baccalaureate into the International School of Brunei. That's the school where my children were. So I prepared a substantial document, but the school rejected the proposal in a 2-line email without giving a reason. This was typical of Brunei. Everything was a secret. I suppose they were afraid of someone snooping around the school and interviewing teachers, etc. You have to remember the royal family were also in the school and just made it incredibly sensitive about outsiders being in the school. Everyone in Brunei was afraid of their shadow. Yeah, including me, and with good reason. So yeah, that was my third attempt. My interest was rekindled 3 years later, though, when I did eventually start an educational doctorate, but by distance this time, with a US university. And I have one more diary entry from this period in July of 2001. I had a particular interest, or still do, in dreams. And I've studied Jung's interpretation of dreams when I was a young man. So yeah, when I started to get nightmares, I became very interested. Yes, it's time I mentioned these. I had one really bad one around this time, what Jung calls a numinous dream. Maria says I've always had them, but I seem to remember them becoming much more frequent and intense after we finished Melbourne and then in Brisbane and then in Brunei. In this particular nightmare, though, someone told me that there was a man at the door. I knew he had a gun, so I hid from him at the top of the stairs. But the door was transparent and he was raising the gun at me. As he raised the gun, I screamed at him louder and louder in order to stop him shooting me. I woke up screaming, and Maria was most disconcerted, saying that the neighbors will have heard. I've been doing this quite regularly now for the last few years, and I still do it actually. Poor Maria. It's always a different nightmare. It's not a recurrent nightmare, but the theme is often the same: being attacked by someone or something. I feel a lot of this related to our experiences in Melbourne, where I believed myself and ourselves to be the victim of the owner of that school. There was also a conspiracy of silence by those around us, which contributed to a very strong feeling of abandonment by friends and colleagues. And this was very intense, whether it was real or imagined, and it's never entirely left me. There's no doubt there is an element of paranoia in my psyche, which does take over from time to time. When this paranoia takes over, I feel depressed afterwards, and then I think the paranoia is often followed by a nightmare, a numinous nightmare. This one was a genuinely frightening experience for both Maria and I. At this time in Brunei, I started to get worried about what to do here in Brunei in my spare time. The actual teaching was not onerous in terms of hours, so I would finish around early lunchtime or late lunchtime and have the afternoon and evening free. Now, I just wasn't sure, though, whether I could put up with the dysfunctionality of the system. I thought I could put up with it for at least 2 more years until my eldest son had completed his international baccalaureate at school. But after a couple of years, I told myself I would just start to de-skill myself. So I needed to keep training myself up with more qualifications. Then what? Well, perhaps one more contract in the Middle East, or a contract in another international school. My nightmares continued. I was treated by a homeopath for the last 2 weeks for my frozen shoulder. He was very, very good, actually. Just when I was beginning to feel better, I had a nightmare in which I shook my fists in my sleep at my pursuing enemy and promptly pulled my shoulder tendon out again in real life. So it was dislocated again. So it was back to square one and was painful, especially at night. What would Jung made of it all? I don't know.